I'm Abigail Thompson, 28 years old, and the night my world shattered started with a family dinner at my parents' luxurious suburban home. My father's voice cut through the clink of silverware. "You could learn from your sister, she's financially independent." My mother's eyes dropped to her plate, while Samantha smirked. I maintained my frozen smile as Dad continued praising her success. Then came the bombshell. He was updating his will to give Samantha control of the family business. My hand trembled, sending my wine glass crashing onto the expensive table. That was the night everything changed forever. Before diving into my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt like the family disappointment. Trust me. What happened after that dinner will show you why sometimes the unsuccessful sibling is the one who sees the truth most clearly. Growing up in the Thompson household meant living with constant comparison. While most children's artwork earned proud spots on refrigerators, mine went straight into portfolios my father reviewed quarterly like business reports. "Good work, Abigail, but let's see more improvement next time," he'd say, his praise always conditional. Meanwhile, my sister Samantha, 4 years my senior, seemed born with our father's business acumen. At 12, when I was still playing with dolls, she was creating spreadsheets for her babysitting clients. Richard Thompson, self-made construction magnate, beamed whenever Samantha spoke about profit margins and investment opportunities. Even as a teenager, our mother Diana floated through these interactions like a beautiful ghost, offering soft smiles and gentle touches but never challenging the increasingly obvious favoritism. She'd been the perfect corporate wife for 30 years, hosting dinner parties for clients and maintaining our home like a showpiece. Sometimes I caught her watching me draw with a wistfulness that suggested her own abandoned dreams, but she never spoke of them. I excelled academically, earning straight A's through high school and a full scholarship to Northwestern, where I discovered my passion for art history. The day I told my father I wouldn't be pursuing business school was the first time I saw genuine disappointment cloud his face. "Art history? What exactly does one do with that degree, Abigail?" he asked, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Museums, galleries, education, preservation," I listed, my voice growing smaller with each word. "So, nothing that makes actual money," he concluded, turning back to his Wall Street Journal. Samantha, with her MBA from Wharton, climbed the corporate ladder with alarming speed. By 30, she was CFO at Riverton Tech, driving a Mercedes and living in a lakefront condo. Meanwhile, I secured my dream job as an assistant curator at the Modern American Art Museum in Chicago, making barely enough to afford my one-bedroom apartment and student loan payments. I loved my work organizing exhibitions that moved people, preserving America's artistic heritage, educating school groups who gasped at their first encounter with Rothko's color fields. But every family gathering became an exercise in defending my choices. Abigail's following her passion, my mother would offer weekly when relatives asked about my career. "Passion doesn't fund retirement accounts," my father would counter. What nobody at that fateful dinner knew was that 2 months earlier, budget cuts had eliminated my position at the museum. I'd been applying desperately for jobs throughout the Midwest art scene, living on savings that had dwindled alarmingly fast. Pride kept me from sharing this news with my family pride, and the certainty of my father's smug "I told you so." But Samantha knew. Somehow, she always knew everything. "Actually, Dad," she said during a lull in his monologue about her recent acquisition deal, "Abby might need your financial advice more than you think. Didn't the museum let you go in March?" The table fell silent. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "Is this true?" my father demanded, his eyebrows forming a perfect V of disapproval. "It was budget cuts across the department," I explained, heat climbing up my neck. "It had nothing to do with my performance." "Performance," he snorted. "In the real world, Abigail, performance is measured by contribution to the bottom line. Clearly, your contribution wasn't valuable enough." Each word landed like a physical blow. The casual cruelty shouldn't have surprised me after 28 years, but it still did. Samantha's face wore an expression of practiced concern that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "I was going to tell everyone once I secured a new position," I said, struggling to maintain composure. "Which you haven't," my father stated rather than asked. How are you paying your bills? I've been freelance consulting for private collectors and picking up gallery work. This was partially true. I had done 2 small consulting jobs and worked 3 weekends at a friend's gallery. The rest of the time, I'd been depleting my savings and cutting expenses wherever possible. So basically unemployed, he said, serving himself more potatoes as if my career crisis was no more concerning than the weather forecast. This is what happens when you choose a field with no practical application. No security. Richard. My mother finally interjected. Perhaps now isn't. When is the right time, Diana? When she's 35 and still bouncing between dead-end art jobs? When she comes asking for money because she can't make rent? I've never asked you for money, I said quietly, gripping my napkin under the table. No, you're too proud for that. Too proud to admit you made the wrong choice. Samantha, he turned to my sister, voice warming instantly. Tell Abigail about the new retirement package Riverton offers executives. As Samantha launched into a detailed explanation of 401k matching and stock options, I saw something in her eyes I recognized from childhood, the gleam of victory. She'd always found ways to highlight my failures while appearing helpful. When we were teenagers, she'd help me with math homework by pointing out every mistake in front of our father, or recommend me for jobs she knew I'd hate. That's when my father dropped his bombshell about updating his will to give Samantha control of Thompson Construction, the company he'd built from nothing into a regional powerhouse. Not just a larger share, complete control. It makes sense, he said, swirling his scotch. Samantha understands business. When I'm gone, the company will need strong leadership, not sentiment. The wine glass slipped from my fingers almost in slow motion, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Nobody moved to clean it. Careful now, Samantha said softly. That's a Bordeaux from 2010. A week after the disastrous dinner, I stood in the gleaming lobby of Thompson Construction headquarters. The 40-story downtown building had been completed when I was in college, my father's crowning achievement. His office occupied the top floor with views of Lake Michigan that magazine photographers regularly requested to use for shoots. I hadn't planned to come here. Since the dinner, I'd avoided my family's calls and texts, licking my wounds in private. But something about my father's announcement about the will felt off. Thompson Construction had been his life's work, and while he'd always favored Samantha, completely cutting me out seemed extreme even for him. Abigail? What a surprise! The voice belonged to James Parker, the company's longtime accountant who had attended many Thompson family gatherings over the years. His eyebrows rose nearly to his receding hairline as he took in my presence. Hi, James. I smiled, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. Just thought I'd stop by and see Dad. Ah, he shifted uncomfortably. He's in meetings all day with the financial team and legal department. Quite busy lately with. He trailed off, adjusting his glasses. With what? I pressed. James glanced around the lobby, then lowered his voice. Probably nothing to worry about, but there's been some attention from regulatory bodies. Standard compliance reviews, your father says. This was new. My father ran a tight ship and prided himself on regulatory compliance. Which agencies? I asked casually. Look, Abigail, James said, checking his watch. I've known you since you were drawing pictures in board meetings. If you want my advice, now might be a good time to pay attention to family business matters. He patted my arm awkwardly. I have to run. Good seeing you. Curiosity piqued. I decided to wait for my father. The receptionist, a new hire who didn't recognize me as a Thompson, allowed me to sit in the lobby until my appointment. 3 hours later, I spotted Samantha emerging from the elevator, deep in conversation with 2 men in expensive suits. She didn't see me tucked behind a large decorative plant. The offshore accounts are secure, one man was saying. But we need to move on the Cayman transfers before the quarter ends. My father's being overcautious, Samantha replied. The SEC doesn't have anything concrete. Securities and Exchange Commission? Offshore accounts? My stomach tightened as they walked past and out the front doors. Instead of confronting my father, I left the building and called my college roommate Megan Rogers, now working at the state's financial regulatory agency. Tax structures for construction companies can be complex, Megan explained over coffee later that day. But offshore accounts for a regional business like your dad's? That raises flags. Could it be legitimate? I asked. Megan's expression was sympathetic but serious. Possibly. But combined with SEC interest? Abby, I can't share specifics, but if your family has financial irregularities, they need excellent legal counsel immediately. That evening, I did something I'd never done, researched my father's company's financial history. News archives revealed Thompson Construction had faced several lawsuits over the years, all quietly settled. Public records showed a labyrinth of subsidiary companies with vague purposes. Nothing definitively wrong, but enough patterns to concern me. The next day, I returned to headquarters with a plan. Claiming I needed to drop off documents for my father, I managed to reach the executive floor. Instead of heading to his office, I knocked on Samantha's door. Abigail? Surprise flashed across her face before settling into cool composure. Slumming with the employed folks today? I ignored the jab. What's going on with the company? I ran into James yesterday, and he mentioned regulatory issues. Samantha's laugh held no warmth. James talks too much. It's routine compliance stuff. And the offshore accounts in the Caymans? Her eyes narrowed dangerously. You're eavesdropping now? How pathetic. She stood, smoothing her tailored blazer. Stay in your lane, little sister. You never understood business. This is why Dad made the right choice about the company. If there's something illegal happening, there's nothing illegal about smart tax strategy, she cut me off. Not everyone wants to live paycheck to paycheck for the sake of artistic integrity. Some of us actually build things of value. As I turned to leave, she called after me. By the way, how's the job search going? Must be hard finding museum work with budget cuts everywhere. The subtle emphasis told me everything Samantha had connections at the museum. My layoff might not have been just budget cuts after all. In the lobby, a man approached me. Miss Thompson? He extended his hand. Kyle Foster, VP of Operations. I knew your father back when this company was run out of a trailer. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners. I overheard some of your conversation with your sister. If you're concerned about the company, perhaps we should talk somewhere private. Over lunch at a nearby diner, Kyle confirmed my suspicions. Richard was always aggressive in business, but legal, he explained, stirring his coffee. The last few years, with Samantha's influence, lines have blurred. The offshore accounts, questionable tax strategies, underbidding competitors, then adding massive change orders after contracts are signed. Why are you telling me this? Kyle's face darkened. I've dedicated 30 years to this company. I won't watch it destroyed by greed. Your father's health isn't good, Abigail. Worse than people know. With Samantha poised to take control, he let the implication hang. What can I possibly do? I'm the art history daughter, remember? You're a Thompson. You have more access than you realize. And unlike your sister, you have a conscience. That night, I approached my mother with what I'd learned. We sat in her garden, the space she retreated to when my father's business talk overwhelmed the house. Mom, I think Dad and Samantha are involved in financial improprieties at the company. Her pruning shears paused over a rose bush. Business is complicated, Abigail. This isn't about business complexity. I'm talking about potentially illegal activities. She resumed cutting, her voice detached. Your father knows what he's doing. He always has. Did you know about the SEC investigation? The shears clattered to the ground. Her face paled, but she quickly composed herself. I think you should leave this alone. Mom, please, Abigail. Some things are better not discussed. She picked up her gardening tools and walked inside, effectively ending our conversation. The next morning, my father called, his voice trembling with rage. How dare you fill your mother's head with nonsense about the company? Stay out of matters you don't understand. Dad, if you're in trouble, you need to address it before. The only trouble I have is a daughter who can't find proper employment and now thinks she's a corporate whistleblower. I've worked too hard to build this legacy for you to threaten it with your uninformed accusations. He hung up before I could respond. The message was clear. I had been officially warned to back off. That same day, Kyle secretly provided me with access to internal company servers. For the next week, I documented questionable transactions, irregular accounting practices, and emails discussing ways to restructure finances ahead of government inquiries. I wasn't just the disappointed artistic daughter anymore. I had become a threat. After my mother betrayed my confidence to my father, I knew I needed to be more careful. Working with Kyle, I began systematically cataloging evidence of financial improprieties at Thompson Construction. Late nights in my apartment became a blur of spreadsheets and financial terms I'd once dismissed as boring business jargon. "Look at this pattern," Kyle said one evening, pointing to transactions flowing through a series of shell companies. "They're moving money through these entities, then offshore, then back as consulting fees. Classic laundering structure. Could there be legitimate reasons?" I still wanted to believe my father wasn't a criminal. Not with this frequency and these amounts. Especially not with the timing around tax filings and project completions. We discovered a document linking Thompson Construction to 5 shell corporations in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The paper trail was complicated but clear once you knew what to look for: systematic tax evasion and probable fraud extending back at least 5 years, coinciding with Samantha's increased influence in the company. What I didn't know was that while I was investigating them, they were watching me. 3 days after finding the shell company document, I returned to my apartment after a job interview to find the door slightly ajar. Cold fear washed over me as I pushed it open. My living room had been ransacked, cushions slashed, books scattered, desk drawers emptied. My laptop was gone, along with all my physical notes about the company. Hands shaking, I called the police, then Kyle. While waiting, I checked the building's security camera footage on my phone. The grainy video showed a tall man in a baseball cap entering my apartment using a key. When he turned toward the camera, my blood froze. It was Robert, Samantha's husband. The police took my statement but seemed skeptical when I couldn't explain why my brother-in-law would have a key to my apartment or why he would steal only my computer and papers. Family dispute over inheritance, one officer muttered to his partner as they left. I couldn't go back to the apartment, not when Samantha and Robert clearly had access. With nothing but the clothes on my back and my phone, I called my college friend Zoe Collins. "Of course you can stay with me," she said without hesitation. "But Abby, this sounds dangerous. Maybe you should drop it?" "I can't," I said, watching the city lights through the window of the Uber. "Not anymore." That night, anonymous texts started. "Back off if you know what's good for you, and some secrets should stay buried." I changed my phone number the next day. Homeless, jobless, and increasingly isolated, I should have felt defeated. Instead, something hardened inside me. The sister who had always played by the rules, who sought approval through achievement and good behavior, was gone. In her place stood someone with nothing left to lose. "We need copies of everything," I told Kyle when he visited Zoe's apartment. "And we need to be smarter about where we keep them." Kyle hesitated. "Abigail, they broke into your home. This isn't just white-collar crime anymore. These people are dangerous. These people are my family," I reminded him bitterly. "And they've shown exactly how far they'll go to protect their secrets." That night, using Kyle's security credentials, we returned to Thompson Construction after hours. With the building nearly empty, we accessed the company servers and copied thousands of incriminating documents. My hands trembled over the keyboard. Not from fear, but from a strange, powerful sense of purpose. "Your father would fire me instantly if he knew," Kyle said as we finished. "My father is dying and leaving the company to a criminal," I replied. "I think you're on the right side of history." We stored copies of the evidence in 3 separate secure cloud accounts and with an attorney friend of Kyle's who specialized in corporate whistleblower cases. I wasn't just gathering information anymore, I was building a case. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about what my father would think, or how to earn his approval. I was thinking about justice, about right and wrong in the clearest terms. The art history daughter had found her backbone, and the timing couldn't have been better. Because what I didn't know then was that Samantha wasn't just planning to take control of the company, she was planning to destroy me completely in the process. As Kyle and I dug deeper into Thompson Construction's finances, a disturbing pattern emerged. The questionable practices hadn't started with Samantha's influence, as I'd initially thought they were foundational to the company itself. "Your father's first major project, the Lakeside Tower? The one that put him on the map?" Kyle pointed to permit documents from 25 years earlier. He bribed city officials to fast-track approvals and ignore code violations. That can't be right, I said. Though the evidence was clear, a series of consulting payments to shell companies owned by family members of the permit office director. The Thompson empire wasn't built on just hard work and vision, Abigail. It was built on cutting corners and paying off the right people. This revelation shattered something fundamental in my understanding of my family. My father, who lectured endlessly about integrity and earning your success, had cheated his way to the top from the very beginning. More disturbing was the evidence that my mother knew everything. Emails between my parents discussed arrangements with officials and special accounting needed to handle certain transactions. In one message from 15 years ago, she wrote, "The Shaw contract situation is concerning. Let's discuss how to handle the paperwork when you get home." My perfect, gentle mother was complicit in all of it. I spent a night reviewing my own history with fresh eyes. The prestigious internship at the Chicago Art Institute I'd secured in college, had that been legitimate, or had my father made a donation? The scholarship to Northwestern I'd been so proud of, had that been truly earned? Then I found something that made my blood run cold. Emails between Samantha and the director of the Modern American Art Museum from 3 months before my layoff. As discussed, the Thompson Family Foundation can offer a substantial endowment for the new wing, contingent on certain staffing adjustments, Samantha had written. The director's response: "While we value Abigail's contributions, we understand the Foundation's concerns about perceived nepotism. The restructuring will be handled with utmost discretion." My sister had bought my firing. The job I'd loved, the career I'd built on my own terms, she'd taken it away with our family's money, all while pretending to sympathize with my unemployment. When I confronted Kyle with this discovery, his face darkened. "I feared something like this. Your sister has been systematically isolating you, Abigail, making you vulnerable." "But why? We've never been close." "But this level of sabotage? Because you're the only real threat to her inheritance. You know the real Richard Thompson, not just the businessman. And somewhere deep down, I think he knows you have the integrity he pretends to value." The next betrayal came from an unexpected source. William Hayes, our family attorney who had attended my birthday parties since I was a child, had been actively helping cover up the company's financial crimes. Documents showed he had established the offshore structures and advised on ways to disguise questionable transactions. Uncle Will, who had once taught me to ride a bike, was laundering money for my father and sister. Most shocking of all was evidence that Samantha wasn't just complicit, she was embezzling from the company itself. Millions of dollars had been siphoned into personal accounts disguised as vendor payments for services never rendered. I confronted my mother with this mountain of evidence on a rare day when I knew she would be alone. We sat in her garden again, the roses she tended so carefully in full bloom around us. "I know everything, Mom," I said quietly, placing a folder of documents between us on the bench. The bribes, the tax evasion, Samantha's embezzlement, all of it. She didn't look surprised or even particularly concerned. She simply sighed, removing her gardening gloves with deliberate care. "What did you expect to find, Abigail? Saints? Your father built something extraordinary from nothing. Do you think that happens by following every rule? There's a difference between bending rules and systematic fraud." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Such black and white thinking. The real world doesn't work that way. "Did you know Samantha paid the museum to fire me?" A flicker of genuine surprise crossed her face, then resignation. "That sounds like her. Your father would do anything to protect his legacy, and Samantha is just like him. And you've enabled both of them for decades." She looked at me then. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in years. "What do you want me to say, Abigail? That I'm sorry? I made my choices long ago. I chose security and comfort over principles. Not everyone has the luxury of your idealism. It's not idealism to expect my family not to commit felonies, Mom." She picked up her shears again, effectively dismissing me. "Let it go, Abigail. For your own sake. Your father doesn't have much time left." This stopped me cold. "What are you talking about?" Her eyes widened slightly, realizing she'd revealed something unintentional. "He didn't want anyone to know. Stage 4. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months. Maybe less. Suddenly, my father's urgency about updating his will made terrible sense. He wasn't just playing favorites, he was preparing for his imminent death. The knowledge should have softened my anger, but instead, it crystallized my resolve. If my father was dying, then his financial crimes would become Samantha's responsibility entirely, and she had proven herself even more ruthless than him. "You should go now," my mother said quietly. "He'll be home soon." As I walked away, she called after me, "Abigail, despite everything, he does love you. In his way." I turned back. "His way isn't good enough anymore, Mom. And neither is yours." 2 weeks after confronting my mother, I received an unexpected invitation to the Thompson Foundation annual charity gala. In previous years, my attendance had been mandatory. The perfect family image required both daughters present, even the disappointing artistic one. This year, given our estrangement, the embossed invitation seemed suspicious. "It's obviously a trap," Kyle said when I showed him. "Obviously," I agreed. "But what kind?" "You shouldn't go. Samantha knows you're gathering evidence. She's planning something." But I saw an opportunity. The gala would be attended by business leaders, politicians, and society figures, people whose good opinion my father and sister coveted. It was the perfect venue to observe them under pressure, maybe even gather more information about their connections. "I'll be careful," I promised Kyle. Besides, what could they possibly do at their own charity event? The answer, as it turned out, was destroy me completely. I arrived at the gala in a borrowed dress from Zoe, feeling both underdressed and conspicuous among Chicago's elite. My father's surprise at seeing me seemed genuine, while Samantha's smile never reached her calculating eyes. "Abigail," my father said stiffly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Family tradition," I replied with equal formality. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. I circulated, making small talk with my parents' friends, many of whom asked awkward questions about my employment situation. I was at the bar ordering a much-needed glass of wine when the murmurs started. "Isn't that Richard Thompson's daughter?" someone whispered loudly. "The one they're investigating for corporate espionage?" Another replied. My blood ran cold as I turned to see 2 security guards approaching, flanking a severe-looking woman in a business suit. "Abigail Thompson?" she asked, though she clearly knew who I was. "I'm Helen Morris, head of security for Thompson Construction. We need to speak with you immediately." Around us, the glittering crowd parted, conversations hushing as I was escorted to a side room where my father and Samantha waited. On the table between them lay printouts of company documents, the same ones I had copied from the servers. "We know you accessed confidential company information without authorization," Helen stated flatly. "These documents were found in your cloud storage, along with evidence of unauthorized transfers from company accounts." "What transfers?" I looked at the papers. They showed me transaction records I'd never seen before, apparently tracing money from Thompson Construction to an account in my name. "Abigail," my father's voice was heavy with practiced disappointment. "How could you? After everything we've given you? This is absurd," I said. "I never made these transfers. This is obviously Samantha's work. She's framing me because I discovered what's really happening at the company." Samantha's expression was a masterpiece of pained concern. "Abby, please don't make this worse. We know you've been struggling financially since losing your job. We understand desperate times lead to desperate measures, but theft and corporate espionage?" "Richard," Helen continued formally, "as head of security, I recommend we involve the police immediately. The evidence of data theft is irrefutable." My father stood slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, a new addition that confirmed his declining health. "No police. Not yet. This is a family matter." He turned to address the small crowd that had gathered at the door. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to the gala. My daughter is dealing with some personal issues. The Thompson family handles its problems privately." As the onlookers reluctantly dispersed, my father faced me with cold fury. "You are no longer welcome at this event or any family function. You are no longer my daughter." The public disowning hit harder than I expected. Despite everything I'd discovered about him, some childish part of me still craved his approval. "Dad, please listen." Security will escort you out, Samantha interjected smoothly. And Abigail? Expect to hear from our lawyers about those transferred funds. I was being marched toward the exit when Kyle appeared, stepping directly into our path. Miss Morris, he addressed the security head. Before you remove Miss Thompson, you should know I have evidence that the server access occurred using my credentials, at my request, as part of an internal audit I authorized as VP of Operations. Helen hesitated, clearly not expecting this development. Furthermore, Kyle continued, I can testify that the supposed transfers to Miss Thompson's account were executed last week when she was demonstrably with me at a meeting with state banking regulators. The color drained from Samantha's face. You're lying. Am I? Kyle's voice was steady. Shall we call those regulators right now? I'm sure they'd be interested to hear about this situation. My father, ever conscious of appearances, quickly took control. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. Helen, please return to the gala. This matter requires further investigation before any actions are taken. As Helen departed, my father turned to Kyle. We'll discuss your future with the company tomorrow. I expected as much, Kyle replied calmly. I'll be sure to bring my evidence to that meeting. Outside the hotel, away from prying eyes, I finally broke down. They nearly had me arrested. My own family. Samantha's desperate, Kyle said, hailing a taxi. She knows we're close to exposing everything. This was her attempt to discredit you before you could act. It worked, I said bitterly. Everyone in that room thinks I'm a thief and a corporate spy. Everyone in that room is more concerned with their martinis than the truth. What matters is what we can prove. Back at Zoe's apartment, I faced the reality of my situation. I was completely estranged from my family, professionally damaged, and potentially facing legal action based on fabricated evidence. I had hit rock bottom. Maybe I should just walk away, I said, staring out the window at the city lights. Move to another state. Start over with a different name. Is that really what Abigail Thompson would do? Kyle asked quietly. The woman who's spent weeks documenting corporate fraud despite threats and break-ins? The woman who stood up to her father maybe for the first time in her life? That woman is exhausted, I admitted. And scared. Good, he said unexpectedly. Fear means you understand the stakes. Exhaustion means you're fighting hard. Neither means you should give up. He revealed then that he had his own motivation for helping me. 30 years earlier, his father had owned a promising construction company that competed with my father's early business. A series of accidents and mysteriously lost bids had bankrupted Kyle's father, who never recovered from the financial and emotional blow. I joined Thompson Construction to learn the truth, Kyle explained. It took years to gain enough trust to access the evidence, but I found it eventually proof your father sabotaged my dad's business through bribes and threats. By then, my father had died, and revenge seemed pointless. Until now, I realized. Until you showed up asking questions, yes, you're different from them, Abigail. You deserve to know the truth about your family, and you deserve a chance at justice. That night, I made a decision. The perfect daughter, the one who sought approval and followed rules, was gone forever. In her place was someone willing to fight fire with fire. After the gala disaster, I moved into a cheap motel using cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. With Samantha actively trying to frame me for crimes, I couldn't risk using credit cards or staying with friends who might be monitored. The room was dreary, peeling wallpaper, mattress with suspicious stains, bathroom light that flickered ominously, but it offered anonymity. First rule of fighting dirty, Kyle said during our strategy meeting at a nondescript diner. Secure your base and resources. I'd spent my adult life in the refined art world, where conflicts were waged through subtle academic disagreements and competition for grants. Now I needed to learn an entirely different set of skills. Step 1 was financial survival. I reached out to Miranda Beck, a gallery owner I'd helped acquire several undervalued pieces that later appreciated significantly. Consulting work? Of course, she said when I called. I've got clients who would pay well for your eye, Abigail. No questions asked about why you're suddenly available. This arrangement provided enough income to survive while operating under the radar. I set up a new bank account under a variation of my name, A.T. Thompson, and had payments directed there. Step 2 was education. Kyle brought business and legal textbooks to our meetings, patiently explaining concepts I'd spent my life actively avoiding. Securities fraud has specific elements that must be proven, he explained, sketching a diagram on a napkin. Intent is key. They need to knowingly misrepresent material facts with the purpose of deceiving investors or regulators. I studied at night in my motel room, absorbing information about corporate structure, tax law, and financial regulations. The art historian in me approached it like learning a new period, the symbolism and context of business instead of Renaissance imagery. Step 3 was gathering additional evidence. Using Kyle's connections, we tracked down former Thompson Construction employees who had left under suspicious circumstances. Many refused to talk, citing non-disclosure agreements or fear of retaliation, but some were willing to meet discreetly. Jeffrey Wilson, the company's CFO before Samantha engineered his early retirement, proved particularly valuable. I left when your father started insisting I sign off on financial statements I knew were fraudulent, he told me over coffee in a suburban cafe. Samantha had been pushing him toward increasingly aggressive tax strategies, and when I objected, I became the enemy. Jeffrey provided details about specific transactions and introduced us to other former executives who had witnessed questionable practices. Slowly, our evidence file grew from suspicious patterns to concrete proof of systematic fraud. The most shocking discovery came when we uncovered evidence that my father and Samantha had blackmailed business competitors and city officials. Recordings and emails documented threats to expose personal indiscretions unless contracts were awarded to Thompson Construction. Your sister is particularly skilled at this, Jeffrey noted grimly. She has a talent for finding people's vulnerabilities. My own approach to the situation was evolving. No longer the reactive victim, I began thinking strategically about pressure points and leverage. I created a false identity, Amanda Wells, art appraiser, to access additional company records through social engineering. I'm calling on behalf of Richard Thompson, I told a junior accountant, affecting Samantha's authoritative tone. He needs the West Side project files immediately for a meeting with investors. The files arrived in my email 20 minutes later. Our first major offensive move came when Kyle and I decided to leak strategic information to business journalists who had covered Thompson Construction in the past. Not enough to trigger immediate legal action, but sufficient to raise questions about the company's financial health and practices. Anonymous sources close to Thompson Construction expressed concerns about accounting irregularities. Read the article in the Chicago Business Journal a week later. The piece mentioned unusual offshore transactions and questions about compliance with SEC regulations. The company's stock dropped 12% that day. My father issued a public statement dismissing the article as irresponsible journalism based on unfounded rumors spread by disgruntled former employees. But the damage was done, investors were asking questions, and analysts were scrutinizing their financials with new skepticism. Samantha's response was swift and vicious. Security at Thompson Construction headquarters doubled overnight. Kyle reported that internal investigations were launched to find the source of the leaks, with employees subjected to intense questioning. She suspects me, he said, but can't prove anything yet. I'm being careful. Through all this, I maintained occasional contact with my mother, feeding her carefully selected information that I knew would get back to Samantha. These false leads sent my sister chasing ghosts while we continued building our case. The art history daughter who once flinched at confrontation was gone. In her place stood a strategist who had learned to use her enemies' weapons against them. My father had built an empire through manipulation and deception. Now I was dismantling it the same way. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly events would escalate beyond anyone's control. My father's declining health, Samantha's increasing desperation, and the growing scrutiny from regulators were creating a perfect storm that would soon break over all our heads. The call came at 3:17 a.m., my mother's voice thin and strained through the phone. Your father's in the hospital. It's not good, Abigail. Despite everything, the betrayals, the fraud, the public disowning, my heart seized at the news. I dressed quickly and took a taxi to Northwestern Memorial, where I found my mother alone in the waiting room, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. Pancreatic cancer, she explained, twisting a tissue between her fingers. He collapsed during a board meeting. The doctors say the cancer has spread to his liver. They're doing what they can, but… She trailed off, the unspoken prognosis hanging in the air. Where's Samantha? I asked. On her way from New York. She had meetings there. My mother's gaze was distant. He didn't want anyone to know how bad it was. Kept working like nothing was wrong. Richard Thompson, who had built an empire through sheer force of will, was finally facing an opponent he couldn't bribe, threaten, or outsmart. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hours later, when we were allowed to see him, I hardly recognized the gaunt figure in the hospital bed. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, the mechanical beeping a stark counterpoint to the silence between us as he opened his eyes and registered my presence. "Abigail," he said, his voice a whisper of its former commanding tone. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I'm still your daughter," I replied simply, "whether you acknowledge it or not." A ghost of his familiar frown crossed his face. Always defiant. Never understood what was important. Even now, dying, he couldn't resist criticizing me. I bit back a retort, reminding myself that arguing with a terminal patient served no purpose. Samantha arrived shortly after, hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, carrying a briefcase along with a small overnight bag. She barely acknowledged me, leaning in to kiss our father's forehead. "Don't worry about anything, Daddy," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "I've spoken to the board. Everything's under control." His eyes, sunken but still sharp, moved between us. "My daughters," he murmured. "So different." "I've updated the will as you requested," Samantha continued, shooting me a triumphant glance. "Hayes is bringing the papers this afternoon for your signature. Even on his deathbed, business came first." Some things never changed. The next 3 days blurred together as my father's condition deteriorated rapidly. The hospital room became a revolving door of doctors, nurses, business associates, paying respects, and lawyers with documents requiring signatures. Through it all, Samantha remained constantly at his side, whispering in his ear between visitors. On the third night, finding myself alone with him while Samantha and my mother went to get coffee, I took the chance to ask the question burning in my mind. "Why did you do it, Dad? The fraud, the bribes, all of it. You had legitimate success. Why risk everything?" His eyes, clouded with morphine, focused on me with surprising clarity. "You never understood business, Abigail. Nobody gets to the top playing by the rules. The winners write the history, and they call their methods strategy instead of cheating. That justifies destroying lives? Blackmailing people? What Kyle's father went through." A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Foster. Should have known he'd hold a grudge. He coughed weakly. "Did what I had to do. Built something lasting. What will you leave behind? Art nobody remembers?" It was the same old argument, but hearing it from this diminished version of my father filled me with pity rather than anger. He truly couldn't see the difference between achievement and corruption. In his mind, the empire justified any means used to build it. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said finally. "I would have preferred a father to a legacy." The next morning, my father slipped into a coma. By evening, he was gone. The funeral was exactly as he would have wanted it, grand, well-attended, full of important people making important speeches about his vision and contribution to Chicago's skyline. I stood beside my mother and Samantha as hundreds of people offered condolences, many clearly wondering about my presence after rumors of my estrangement had circulated. Through it all, Samantha played the role of grieving daughter flawlessly, accepting sympathies with dignified tears and gracious words about continuing her father's legacy. I remained silent, observing the performance and the audience's reaction to it. The reading of the will took place the following week in William Hayes's oak-paneled office. As expected, Samantha received control of Thompson Construction and the majority of our father's personal assets. My mother got the house and a generous lifetime allowance. To me, he left his collection of art books a paltry inheritance monetarily, but a stinging final commentary on my life choices. The collection, housed in his home office, contained volumes on American and European painting he'd acquired over decades but rarely opened. "I'm sorry, Abigail," Hayes said, seeming genuinely uncomfortable. "Your father was." said in his views. Samantha didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. The books are appropriate. They're what you valued. After all, I accepted the slight with more grace than I felt. When can I collect them? Any time, my mother said. They're just gathering dust now. That weekend, I went to the family home to pack up the books. Alone in my father's office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, I carefully boxed the leather-bound volumes. It was while reaching for one on a high shelf that I noticed something odd, a book that didn't match the others, wedged behind the row. Pulling it out, I discovered not a book but a journal. Inside, in my father's distinctive handwriting, were dated entries spanning 2 decades. Flipping through, my breath caught as I saw references to arrangements with city officials, special handling of contracts, and specific mentions of offshore accounts. It was a record of everything, every bribe, every fraudulent deal, every instance of blackmail or coercion. My father, ever the methodical businessman, had documented his crimes in meticulous detail. Tucked inside the journal was a sealed envelope with my name written on it. The note inside was brief. Abigail, you were right about many things, wrong about others. This record exists because history belongs to those who control the narrative. Now, it belongs to you. Use it wisely. Dad. Beneath the note was a key to a safety deposit box at Chicago Federal Bank. The next day, the box yielded additional journals, USB drives containing scanned documents, and another note. The art books were for Samantha's benefit. This is your real inheritance. I always knew you were watching, judging. Now you can be the moral authority you've always aspired to be. Or not. Your choice. Even in death, my father had managed to challenge me one final time. But he'd also given me something far more valuable than company control. He'd given me the truth, documented in his own hand. The perfect ammunition. Armed with my father's journals and digital records, I walked into Thompson Construction headquarters 3 weeks after his funeral. The security guard at the desk, recognizing me, made a quick call before reluctantly allowing me upstairs. Samantha was waiting in her new office, formerly our father's. The lake view now framed by her modern art pieces, replacing his traditional landscapes. She didn't stand when I entered, merely glancing up from her computer with thinly veiled annoyance. Abigail, I'm extremely busy. The transition period is demanding. I'm sure it is, I replied, placing my father's journal on her desk. Managing a company while covering up decades of fraud must be quite the challenge. Her eyes flickered to the journal, then back to me, expression unchanged. If you're here to make accusations based on whatever nonsense Kyle Foster has been feeding you, save your breath. The board has full confidence in my leadership. This isn't from Kyle. I opened the journal to a flagged page. It's from Dad. His personal record of every bribe, every blackmail victim, every manipulated contract, including your special projects. The color drained from her face as she recognized our father's handwriting. She reached for the journal, but I pulled it back. There are copies, and more journals, and digital records, all secured with multiple attorneys. You're bluffing, she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Dad would never keep records like that. He was too smart. He was smart enough to create an insurance policy, and apparently sentimental enough to leave it to me. I sat in the chair across from her desk. Did you know he was documenting your embezzlement, too? The personal accounts in the Caymans? The kickbacks from suppliers? Samantha's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. You have no idea what it took to keep this company growing. The margins in construction are razor thin without the right adjustments. Adjustments like having me fired from my job? Was that necessary for company growth? Her laugh held no humor. That was personal. You were always his blind spot. The precious artistic daughter who could do no wrong despite contributing nothing to his legacy. Her voice rose. Do you know what it's like growing up with a sister who gets praised for finger paintings while you're expected to present business plans? Who gets applauded for participation ribbons while you're criticized for anything less than first place? Are you seriously suggesting you were the unfavored child? Dad handed you everything. Because I earned it, she shouted, standing now. I worked myself to exhaustion for his approval while you floated through life following your passion. And that justified sabotaging my career? Breaking into my apartment? Framing me for crimes? You became a threat, she said simply. When you started asking questions, gathering evidence, I couldn't let you destroy everything we built. Everything you stole, I corrected. And now you have a choice. Either step down as CEO voluntarily, or I take these journals to the FBI. The door opened suddenly, revealing our mother. Her face registered shock at finding both daughters locked in confrontation. What's happening here? She asked. Samantha immediately shifted, her voice becoming tremulous. Mom, thank goodness. Abigail is threatening me with some fabricated journals she claims Dad kept. She wants to take control of the company. They're not fabricated, I said evenly, handing one journal to my mother. See for yourself. As she flipped through the pages, her expression shifted from confusion to recognition. Richard's handwriting, she murmured. But he wouldn't. But he did, I said. Every detail, Mom. Including your knowledge of everything. Samantha moved to stand beside our mother, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. These could easily be forgeries. Abigail has been unstable since losing her job. This is clearly a desperate attempt to— Stop it, Samantha. My mother cut her off. Still reading. These are real. These are things only Richard and I knew. She looked up at me. Where did you find these? Behind the art books he left me, along with access to more evidence. Samantha's face contorted with rage. She lunged for the journal, but in her haste, knocked over a crystal paperweight that shattered on the floor. You ungrateful little, she grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin. The office door opened again as the commotion drew attention. Kyle entered, followed by Jeffrey Wilson and two board members who had been meeting down the hall. They froze at the tableau before them, Samantha physically attacking me. Our mother, holding the damning journal, papers scattered across the floor. What is going on here? Asked Harold Winters, the board chairman. Family disagreement, Samantha said quickly, releasing me and straightening her blazer. Nothing to concern the board. Actually, I said, it concerns the board directly. I turned to the executives. My sister has been embezzling from the company while continuing the fraudulent practices my father established. I have documented evidence. She's lying, Samantha insisted. She's been trying to undermine the company since being cut from our father's will. Kyle stepped forward. I can corroborate Miss Thompson's claims. As VP of Operations, I've documented numerous financial irregularities over the past 5 years. Jeffrey Wilson nodded. As former CFO, I can confirm that these practices began under Richard Thompson and expanded under Samantha's influence. The board members exchanged troubled glances. Harold Winters extended his hand. I think we need to see this evidence immediately. Of course, I said, passing him the journal. This is just the beginning. There are years of records. As Harold began reading, Samantha made one last desperate play. Abigail, she said, lowering her voice so only I could hear. We can work this out between us. Name your price. 10 million? 20? You could fund any artistic project you want. Never work again. The old Abigail might have been intimidated by her intensity, might have sought compromise to keep the peace. But I was no longer that person. This isn't about money, I told her. It's about truth and consequences. The next few hours were a blur of emergency board meetings, calls to company attorneys, and preliminary discussions about cooperating with authorities. Samantha alternated between threats, pleas, and attempts to rally allies, but the evidence was too overwhelming. By evening, she had been suspended pending investigation, with Harold Winters appointed interim CEO. Later that night, I confronted my mother at home. Did you know she forged parts of Dad's will? She sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. I suspected. The final version had changes Richard never mentioned to me. She paused. He wanted to split the non-company assets equally between you two. Samantha convinced him otherwise during those last days in the hospital. And you said nothing? What would have been the point, Abigail? The will was legally executed. And frankly, I thought maybe it was better for you to be free of all this. She gestured vaguely, encompassing the house, the company, the entire Thompson legacy. Look what it's done to Samantha. To your father. To me. I couldn't argue with that assessment. The empire had consumed them all in different ways. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. "Ensure the company cooperates fully with authorities. Make restitution to those harmed where possible. Then walk away." And Samantha? I thought about my sister, brilliant, driven, corrupted by ambition and our father's conditional love. She'll face consequences, but they'll be legal ones, not personal revenge. My mother reached for my hand. "You're a better person than any of us deserved, Abigail." "I'm just trying to end this the right way," I said. "Someone in this family should." The legal proceedings against Samantha and Thompson Construction unfolded gradually over the next year. With my father's detailed records and testimony from company insiders, prosecutors built a strong case alleging fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. Samantha, facing multiple felony charges, accepted a plea agreement that included significant restitution and a 3-year prison sentence. The board of directors appointed an interim leadership team and implemented comprehensive reforms to company practices. I declined their offer to join the board or take any role in the business. "I appreciate the gesture," I told Harold Winters, "but my expertise and passion lie elsewhere. The company needs leadership from people who understand the industry and can rebuild its reputation ethically." My relationship with my mother evolved into something more honest, if sometimes uncomfortable. We began meeting weekly for lunch, cautiously rebuilding trust between us. "I enabled so much," she admitted during one of these meetings. "Not just with your father's business practices, but with how he treated you. I should have protected you more." "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question I'd wanted to pose for decades. She was quiet for a long moment. Fear, mostly. Of being alone. Of losing the security I'd worked so hard to maintain. She stirred her tea absently. "And habit. After a while, it was easier to look away than to confront what was happening." "Are you happier now?" The question surprised us both. She considered it seriously. "Not happier, but more authentic. It's strange to discover who you are at 68. With my portion of the restitution funds significantly less than what Samantha had offered as a bribe, but substantial nonetheless, I established a small art consultation business. My knowledge of American art and museum connections proved valuable to private collectors and corporate clients seeking to build meaningful collections rather than just status symbols. Zoe, whose apartment had sheltered me during my darkest days, became my first employee. "From letting me crash on your couch to payroll in under 2 years," she joked. "We should write a business book." Kyle and I continued working together through the legal proceedings, our professional collaboration gradually evolving into something more personal. Our shared experience had created a bond that neither of us had anticipated. "We make a good team," he said one evening over dinner. "The art historian and the operations guy. Different perspectives, same values. Is that your way of asking me to go into business with you?" I teased. "Maybe something more than business," he replied, reaching for my hand across the table. Healing came in unexpected ways. Through therapy, I began to understand how my family dynamics had shaped my self-perception and choices. I reconnected with the passion for art that had originally driven my career, now uncomplicated by the need to prove its value to my father. 1 year after my father's death, I hosted a gallery opening featuring artists whose work explored family relationships and identity. The event marked my full return to the art world, now on my own terms. Among the attendees were several former Thompson Construction executives who had weathered the scandal and remained with a reformed company. They approached me somewhat tentatively, unsure of their welcome. "The company is different now," Harold Winters told me. "More transparent, more focused on integrity than just the bottom line. Your father built something substantial, but you forced it to become something better." "That's a complicated legacy," I acknowledged. "The best kind," he replied. "Simple legacies don't change anything." My mother attended the opening as well, examining each artwork with genuine interest rather than the polite attention she'd always given my career. When she reached a powerful installation about maternal absence, she stood before it for a long time. "I see myself here," she said when I joined her. "Not flattering, but truthful. Art doesn't have to flatter to be valuable," I told her. The lesson I'd spent my career learning. It just has to reveal something real. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The Thompson Construction logo still illuminated the top of the building my father had considered his greatest achievement. But now I saw the city differently, not as monuments to wealth and power, but as a community of people affected by the choices of those in positions of influence. That family dinner a year ago had shattered more than just a wine glass. It had broken the illusions that kept me small. In the fragments, I found myself. Not the perfect daughter seeking approval, not the rebel rejecting everything my family valued, but someone more complex and complete. Someone who understood that real strength comes not from financial independence, but from the courage to face difficult truths and act on them. If my father could see me now, would he finally be proud? Perhaps not. His metrics for success had always been different from mine. But for the first time in my life, that thought didn't sting. His approval was no longer the currency I traded in. I had found something more valuable, my own measure of worth. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that were crushing you? Or discovered that someone you admired had feet of clay? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might need to hear that sometimes the path to healing requires confronting painful truths. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, your value isn't determined by someone else's balance sheet.